How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Zayin, Daf 7 of Masechta Shevuos. Friends, today's Daf. All right, whatever. It's all right, but so it's maybe it's borderline technical. Now we're not going to get so far in Daf Zayin with Beis. My rationale being that basically on Daf Zayin with Beis, there's a 2 dots about 5-10 lines into the Amud. And then basically everything after that is like this long brisa that then yesterday is just going to be analyzing that brisa. And I just feel like if we do it today, I'm going to have to do it again tomorrow. So I figure let's just do it tomorrow. But it means that whatever, tomorrow there's going to be a bunch of Zayin with Beis to do. I'll go upon him. Alright. We're going to start on Daf Vav Amid Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. Es sheyesh ba yediyah betchila v'chulei. You could tell me what this is talking about. This is talking about, 1 second. Wait, 1 second. Yeah. Wait, what? Right. Yeah, right. Okay, and that's, yeah, of course. Okay, wait, 1 second. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. 1 second. So this is, of course, talking about when there is a yediyah batchila and a yediyah basof. Kilu, you knew that you touched a dead mouse or something. You had a lapse, and you ate kodshim or went into the mikdash, right? Tumas mikdash v'kodashav, and then you realized later, and you're like, dope. So you bring a korban ole v'yored. Okay, this is what we are discussing now. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Minayin she'ein akosu medaber ela betumas mikdash v'kodashav. How do we know that the psukim by korban ole v'yored are in fact talking about tumas mikdash v'kodashav? Because I'm going to read you those psukim right now. I'll read them to you. It says, Sefer Vayikra, Parakeh Pasuk Beis. O nefesh shatiga b'chol davar tamei, somebody who touches something tamei, o b'nivlas chai tamei, o b'nivlas behema tamei, o b'nivlas sheretz tamei, v'nel v'menu v'tamei v'ashim. Okay, basically he touched something tamei, and he had a lapse, and he's tamei, and he's guilty. Guilty for what? Doesn't say. O chiga b'tumas adam, he touched a dead person, chol tumaso sheit ma'ba, v'nel v'menu v'yadav v'ashim. He knows about it, and he's guilty. Knows about what? And then a few seconds later, it starts talking about etc. What is that? Regular chatos. Okay, but it's a korban oli, right? Or you could bring birds or flour, whatever. But so that's a korban oli. So that's the that's the parsha of korban oli v'yored, and it talks about tuma there, but it doesn't say what about it. Yeah, sure, it says you're tameh. You don't have to bring a korban every single time you're tamei. What about being tamei? So we, of course, are in the Mishnah. We're talking about tumas mikdash v'kodashav. He was tamei, and then he went into the base of mikdash, or he ate kodshim. That's not clear from the pesukim at all. So how do we know this? Again, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Minayin she'ein hakasu medaber ela b'tumas mikdash v'kodashav. How do we know that these pesukim by korban ole v'yored are in fact talking about tumas mikdash v'kodashav? V'dinu. Well, I'll tell you why. It's logical. Hayil v'hizir v'onash al atuma. Well, in the context of tuma, we have a warning and we have a mitzvah lo saseh. We have a warning and we have a punishment of karis by tuma. V'chiyev korban al tuma. We also have this korban ole v'yored by tuma. Okay. Well, makish hizir v'onash al atuma. Well, concerning the warning and the punishment of kares by tuma, it's by tumash mikdash v'kodashav, being tamei and eating kodshim, being tamei and going into the Beis HaMikdash. Well, then afkishachiv korban ala tuma, l'chiv ela al tumash mikdash v'kodashav. So therefore, it's logical to say that also by the korban ole v'yored, it's in the same context. Tamei sha'achal kodshim, tamei shenichnas la mikdash. Right, just like those are the scenarios where there's a chiyuv kares. So this is also the scenario where you would bring a korban when there's a lapse. But frek de Gemara, and this is be'etzem going to be the focus of today's daf, based on this question, which is ve'ema truma. Maybe I'll say that the korban olav yored is by truma, tamish achal truma. Trying to prove how we know that it's tumas mikdash v'kadashav rather than truma is basically going to be our back and forth for the next bit. So again, ve'ema truma, maybe I'll say that it is that the korban olav yored is by truma, shehizir v'onash, because after all, there's a warning against eating truma in a state of tumah, and there's also chiyuv kares. Not a chiyuv kares. That's important. There's it's misa b'dei shamayim. It's misa b'dei shamayim. It's not kares. It's misa b'dei shamayim. So let's say that just like there's an azhara and there's an onesh of misa b'dei shamayim by truma. So let's say, right, tamish achal truma. So let's say that the same applies with the korban, that the korban of Tuma is talking also about Tamei Sha'achal Truma, when there's a lapse, would be Chayav a korban Ole V'yored. So, and for the Gemara, Meh. Lo Ashkichon Oven Misa V'chayav Ole korban. And as Rashi points out in the last Rashi of Vav Mud Beis, She'ein Chatos Ba'a Ela Ashigigas Kares. A korban, this is I think is an important principle. A korban chatos, I think we must have seen it before, maybe Masechta Shabbos, other places, I don't know. But a korban chatos is brought when you accidentally violated something that there's chiyuv kares for. For example, Tamei shachol sakodesh, Tamei shenichnas lamikdash. But Tamei shachal truma is misa b'dei shamayim, not kares. We only have korban chatases by kares, not by misa b'dei shamayim. And a korban olav yored is be'etzem a korban chatas. If you can't afford the traditional korban chatas of a seira or a kispa, so you could bring doves, even flour if you need to. But it's be'etzem a korban chatas, and therefore we only find korban chatases for chiyuvei kares, such as tumas mikdash v'kodashav, not for chiyuve misa b'dei shamayim, such as truma. But frek de gemare, ema hanemile korban kavua. But one second, maybe I'll say that we only find a korban kavua by kares. You know, a korban chatas. If you're machal Shabbos b'shogeg, you have to be a korban chatas. That korban chatas must be a kispa or a seira, a female goat or a female sheep. I think that's called an u. And you can't bring flour offering. You can't bring birds. It must be a female goat. What's a female? Is there a name for a female goat? A goatess, a goatess, or an ewe. You have to bring a goatess or an ewe. A goatess or an ewe. So I'll say that when there's a chiyuv kares b'shoigeg, you have to bring a korban chatas, specifically a korban chatas, a goatess or an ewe. You can't bring flour. You can't bring birds. But I'll suggest that by Tamei Shachal Truma, which is only a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim, not kares, so there maybe I won't be chayiv a korban chatas, a traditional korban chatas, but maybe an olav yored I can be chayiv. So again, the ema hani mile korban kavua. I'll say that this principle of a misa the chayiv aleh korban. I'll say when we say that we never have a scenario where misa b'dei shamayim is chayiv a korban. Yeah, maybe it's never chayiv a traditional korban chatas. But avol olav yored nesi, but misa b'dei shamayim, maybe you bring a korban olav yored. Maybe tamei shachal satruma should bring a korban olav yored. After all, maybe to have a hashmias kol vabitos vasayim. In that parsha of korban olav yored, there's also in that same parsha, right? Well, what's the first pasuk there in that parsha? Perik Hey of Vayikra Pasuk Aleph Nefesh Kisechto V'Shama Kol Allah V'Edo Ro Yodim Lo Yagav V'Los V'Nos Avonu. This is Shevuos Eidus, which is I think the fourth parak of Masechta Shevuos. Shevuos Eidus is the fourth parak of Masechta Shevuos, and then there's also Vayakesh. Where am I? Oh Nefesh Kisechava Levates Vasayim Lahar Leitiv L'Chol Shevati Adam Mishvuah V'Nelim Menu V'Yodav Hashem L'Achas Meila, or a Shevuos Bitoy, Ochal V'lo Ochal. There also is a korban olav yored. Now, by Shevuos Bitoy, by Shevuos Eidus, there's no chiyuv kares there, and yet you're bringing a korban olav yored. So maybe by Truma, maybe when we're talking about Tameh, we're talking about Tameh Shachal Truma. Sure, there's no chiyuv kares, but it seems like you don't need a chiyuv kares for a korban olav yored. After all, we see that korban Shevuos by Shevuos Eidus and by Shevuos Bitoy, there is korban olav yored, and there's no kares dartin. There's no kares in those scenarios. Amar Kra, the pasuk says ba. Yes, but in the context of tuma by korban olav yored, it says ba. What does the pasuk say? Okiga betumas adam l'chol tumasa asher yitma ba. Mimenu v'yadav Hashem ba limute truma, and ba is coming to exclude, right? It to the exclusion of truma. But the aim of ba limute mikdash. Come on, what? Well, just like you're going to say that ba is excluding truma, well, I'll push back and say ba is excluding tumas mikdash v'kodashav. Delo sagi b'korban olav yored. Then I'll argue that by tumas mikdash v'kodashav, which is a chiyuv kares, a korban olav yored is not sufficient. By chiyuv kares, you need more than that. You need a proper korban chatas. I'll argue that davka by tamei shachal truma, which is only chiyuv misa bidei shamayim, a korban olav yored is sufficient. At the ma'aseh korban kavua, I'll say that by tumas mikdash v'kodashav, which is a chiyuv kares, you'd have to bring a proper korban chatas. Krirova ole de Rebbe doile mayim mi boris amukim. Rava says about Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that he draws water from deep wells. Titanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Rabbi Yomi says, Rabbi Ekra Ani Chaya, that the pasuk says by korban olav yored. What does it say? O nefesh asher tiga, I'm reading the pasuk, b'chol davar tamei, somebody touches anything tamei, o benivlas chaya tameya, the carcass of a tamei beast, o benivlas behema tameya, or the carcass of a impure animal. Now the thing is, back in the Gemara, says Rabbi Omer, ekra ani chaya. Chaya should be sufficient because chaya includes behema. Behema lama nemra. So then why does the pasuk then say, O benivlas behema tmeya? Why do I need behema tmeya? I already said chaya tmeya. That includes in it behema tmeya. So behema lama nemra. Why does it say behema? Well, I'll tell you why. Because nemar kan behema tmeya, because it says here by korban olav yored behema tmeya, v'nemar lahalon, and it says by tamei she'achal kodesh behema tmeya. What does the pasuk say? V'nefesh gesiga b'chol tamei b'tumas adam oba behema tmeya. So you have somebody who's tamei, oba b'chol sheketz tamei ve'achal mibsar zevach hashtam mishal Hashem v'nichsar nefesh miyamer. So there it's talking about tamei she'achal es hakodesh. So it says behema tmeya there as well. So malahalon tumas kodesh, just like over there, it's talking about tamei she'achal es hakodesh. Afkan, so here also by korban olav yored tumas kodesh, it's talking about by korban olav yored. What tuma are we talking about? Tamei she'achal es hakodesh. Ashkechon tumas kodesh tumas mikdash minolim. But now the Gemara continues. Okay, fine. So from that brisa, Rebbe has taught us that by korban olav yored, tamei she'achal es hakodesh would bring a korban olav yored, but we're not. But we said it's not just tamei she'achal es hakodesh; it's also tamei shenichnas lamikdash. How do we know this? Behema tmea, only tamei she'achal es hakodesh. How do we know tamei shenichnas lamikdash? Cheva, what do you say? Amar Kra, that the pasuk says by a yoledes. This Parshas Tazria, mamish this week's parsha. No, Parshas Mitzvah. No, Tazria. Isha kisazria v'yalda zachar. Yeah, but what was it? Isha kisazria v'yalda zachar v'aya. I don't know. Isha kisazria v'yalda zachar v'tama shivas yomim. Kimeid nidas dvosa titma. V'shloshim yom teshav meitara. So it says there, during this period, she's a tvulas yom aruch, and it says b'chol kodesh lo siga v'lamikdash lo savo. It says by a yoledes that until she until the end of her yemei tahara, so she's tmeah for 7 days. For 33 days, by Zachar, she is Tehora, but she still can't. She's a Tvulas Yom until the end of that entire period. So then, during that period, and if it's for a girl, it's 80 days. For a boy, it's 40 days. B'chol Kodesh lo siga. She can't touch any Kodesh. Ve'la Mikdash lo savo, and she also can't go to the Beis HaMikdash. So we're juxtaposing Kodesh and Mikdash. Iskash Mikdash leKodesh. Mikdash is juxtaposed to Kodesh, and therefore, just like the halacha is that by tamei she'achal es hakodesh, and during a lapse, and there's yediyah batchila, yediyah basof, korban olav yored, the same halacha would apply to tamei shenichnas la mikdash. But frek the Gemara, ihachi truma nami. But if that's the case, then we should also say that there's a korban olav yored by tamei she'achal truma. The Amar, because we said b'chol kodesh lo siga, that when it says kol kodesh lo siga l'rabes es truma, that is coming to include truma as well. And therefore, if we're going to say based on that pasuk of b'chol kodesh lo siga v'lamikdash lo savo, that is coming to include tamei she'achal es kodesh, it should also include tamei she'achal truma. Hamiyat rachmana ba. But wait, but earlier we said ba to exclude truma. Ema ba lemutei mikdash. I'll ask the same question we asked earlier. I'll say that ba excludes mikdash and it includes and tamei she'achal truma is included by the korban olav yored. Well, mistaber mikdash lo mima'atinon shekein bekaris kimosa. Well, look. We know that tamei she'achal kodesh is going to be by korban olav yored because we had the behema tmei gezerah shava. Now, if we're going to include either tamei shenichnas lemikdash or tamei she'achal truma, and we're going to have to exclude one of them because of ba, well, it would make sense that the one that is included is tamei shenichnas lemikdash. Why? Because tamei shenichnas lemikdash is a chiyuv karis if you do it on purpose, and so is tamei she'achal kodesh. So it makes sense that tamei shenichnas lemikdash would be the one that is included when it comes to korban olav yored. But adrabah fakert truma lo matinon. No, don't exclude truma. Include truma. Why? Sheken achila kemosa, because truma is something that you eat, just like kodesh is something that you eat, and unlike tamei shenichnas lemikdash, which is not eating anything. So basically, we are at a stalemate. We are trying to figure out by the tumah, by korban olav yored, what is included, what is excluded. We know so far that tamei she'achal kodesh is going to be by korban olav yored. We're not sure though about tamei shenichnas lemikdash, or maybe it's tamei she'achal truma. That we're struggling to figure out. So Ella, Rather, Amar Rave, rather says Rave, Shalosh Kreisos B'Shlomim Lama. In the context of a Korban Shlomim, it says a Chiyuv Karis 3 times. Lama. How come? Well, so this is interesting. Achas leklal v'achas lefrat v'achas letuma aksuva b'teres tam v'en yodei amai v'yomer b'tumas kodesh v'nerin b'tumas kodesh nafka lei m'rebi t'nerin b'tumas miktosh. Okay. Why is this interesting? Well, because we've learned about klal ufrat uchlal. Who can tell me? How does klal ufrat work? Ein b'chlal ela mash b'frat. It's interesting. If we look, does anybody say Rabbi Shmuel Omer in the morning when they're davening to the Bnei Shalom? So I'm gonna pull out my handy dandy chitas over here. I was using it before for its chumash function. Now I'm going to use it for its siddur function. And it says here, so there's a few interesting things in Rabbi Shmuel Omer. One thing we have is, where are we? Okay. Wait, where is it? Wait, what? Oh, come on. Wait, what? Okay, yeah, wait, that's the other thing. Okay, where does it say Ein B'chlal Ela Mash B'frat? Wait, that is a thing, right? Am I not making this up? What? Wow, did I completely make that up? Wow, here I was trying to prove something from Yishmael. That's not actually even in there? Oops. Okay, I guess that's just from the Gemara. Okay, scratch that. Normally we say that when it comes to klal ufrat, so when you have a klal ufrat, ein b'chlal ela masha b'frat. The prat is coming to define the prat is coming to define the klal. Therefore, how is that relevant here? Well, actually, if you look at the psukim, the first pasuk that we're talking about is Emor alei medoraseichem. I'm reading the pasuk. Kol isha sheyikav mikol zarichem as el hakodshim asher yakdishu bnei Yisrael Hashem tumas olav v'nichso nefesh milefonai ani Hashem. Now, there it doesn't actually say shlomim explicitly. Now the next pasuk, the next two pasukim really, right? The next one is v'nefesh shetocha basu mizevach hashlomim asher Hashem v'tumas olav v'nichso nefesh mi'ameh. And the third pasuk is v'nefesh shetiga b'chol tamei b'tumas adam b'mei b'tmei b'chol sheges tamei v'achal mib'sar zevach hashlomim asher Hashem v'nichso nefesh mi'ameh. Now, so interestingly, the first one was a kind of a klal, right? What does it say? It says just says kodshim. Doesn't say shlomim. So we have a klal which says kodshim. We have a prat which says shlomim. Now, interesting. Normally we would say klal ufrat ein b'chlal ela masha b'frat. That shlomim is coming to define the klal and say that it is only talking about shlomim. But interestingly, we are going to apply a different function. This is in Rabbi Shmuel Omer. It says kol davar asher b'chlal v'yotzu l'ton v'yotzu min haklal l'lamed lo l'lamed al atzma yotze elo l'lamed al klal kula yotze. That when you have something that was initially included in the klal, so we had kodshim. Kodshim includes all korbanos. Now the next part says shlomim. Shlomim was kol davar shaya b'chlal was already included in the klal. V'yotze min haklal l'lamed lo l'lamed al atzma yotze l'lamed al klal kula yotze. It's come to teach about the whole klal. That what? So as Rashi explains, that just like the shlomim is kodshim mizbeach, is a korban that goes on the mizbeach, so actually the klal is including anything that goes on the mizbeach, to the exclusion of kodshim bedek habayis. Now, the interesting thing is Rashi points out, why don't we say klal ufrat ein b'chlal ela masha b'frat? Why don't we say that the prat is defining the klal? That's basically how we've always done it. So the answer is because klal ufrat is when they're next to each other. When you have a klal and then right next to it there's a prat, so the prat is defining the klal. Here actually they're in different parshas, right? One of them is in Parshas Emor, the other is in Parshas something else. One of them is Parshas Emor, the other is Parshas, I don't know, maybe Tzav or something. Yeah, I think it's in Tzav. So where is it? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's in Tzav. Yeah, Tzav is Aaron. Yeah. So they're like in different parshas. So therefore, there we won't say that the prat is define the klal. There we're going to say that it's actually coming to define the klal as being things that are similar to the prat. Anyways, interesting thing. So now, also Rashi explains why we don't refer to it as a klal ufradu klal over here. Okay. Anyways, fine. Now, where were we? So Ela Amar Rav. Rather says Rav. Shalosh kreis b'shlam lama. How come it says kares 3 times when it comes to shlamim? Well, achas l'chlal v'achas l'frat. Well, one place it's a klal, the other place it's a prat, and we learn from klal ufrat that it's actually talking about kodshei mizbeach. Okay. Ve'achas, and the third one is to teach the tuma ksuva b'torah stam, that when you have tuma written in the Torah and it doesn't say, it's sparse on details. For example, like we have by Tumas Mikdash. No, for example, like we have by Korban Olav Yard, it just talks about Tumah and we don't know what about it. The Eni Odeh Maya, I don't know what's the Tumah. That's the whole confusion over here. It's talking about Tamei Shenichnas Mikdash. It's talking about Tamei Shachat Truma. We don't know. So Ave Omer Tumas Kodesh. Well, from the fact that this third pasuk is talking about a korban shlamim, i.e. kodshim, well, rest assured that whenever you have tuma stam and you don't know what it is, it's tumas kodesh. Now the thing is, we already learned out tumas kodesh by korban olav yored from Rebbe's gezer shava of behemat meya. And if we don't need it to teach by korban olav yored Tamish Achal Kodesh, because we already know that from Behemat from Rebbe. So Taneu Inyan Litumas Mikdash. Well, then say it's not talking about Tumas Kodesh, it's talking about Tumas Mikdash, that a Tomei that goes into Beis HaMikdash. So there you have it. That it's Tamish Nichnas HaMikdash by a Korban Olav Yard. But V'haimi Bar Lichdor Babo. To which Gemara says, not so fast. This is needed for Rabbi Abo's teaching. To Rabbi Abo, that says Abo Shalosh Kreisus B'Shlam Lama. Why does it say Kares 3 times by Shlamim? Achas l'Klal v'achas l'Prat. One for the Klal, one's for the Prat. V'achas l'Dvarim she'ena necholin. And the third one is to teach that you're even Chayiv Kares if you're Tameh and you eat things that you wouldn't normally eat. As Rashi says, Kigon Eitzim Shel Ma'aracha. If you eat the wood from the altar, from the pyre. Ulavona Victorious, or the frankincense. If you eat them when you're tamei chayiv for that. So Rabbi Bo says that the third kares by shlamim is to teach even if you eat the things that aren't normally eaten, you're going to be chayiv kares, and it's not talking about korban olav yored. And what about according to Reb Shimon, who disagrees? And says, well, what about according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that you would not be chayiv kares for a tamei person who eats those things that are not normally eaten? Well, the isuri chatos hapnimios. Well, that is coming to include that even if you eat the korban chatos hapnimios, for example, the sarah and the par and Yom Kippur that are nasa b'fnim, that their blood is thrown inside, or parlim davar shel tzibor, par kohen mashiach, right? That those are korbanos that the blood is thrown inside in the heichel. So the third kares is to say that you'd be chayiv kares for tamei that even eats those, because the Sagadat Chamina may have thought to say Hol v'Amr Reb Shimon, since Reb Shimon holds Kol she'enu karev al mizbeach hachitzon kishlamim ein chayiv and alei mishum pigul. I may have thought to say that since Reb Shimon's opinion is that there's no chiyuv of pigul when it comes to those korbanos, because you only chayiv pigul for korbanos that are offered on the mizbeach chitzon, like shlamim, but these korbanos would be excluded from pigul. So mishum tuma namilo, I might think that they would be excluded also from tamei she'achal kodesh, kamash malon demi chayiv, and therefore the third kares is to say that even according to Reb Shimon you would be chayiv for those. So that third kares by shlamim is unavailable to learn korban olav yored by Tamei Shenichnas Lamikdash. Elo Amri Nardoe Mishmei de Rove, rather than Nardayin say in the name of Rove, Shalish Tumis Bishlamim Lama. How come in all three of those psukim by Shlamim, forget about Karis, but why does it say Tuma in all three of those psukim? Achas lechlal, v'achas leprat, v'achas letuma, aksuv b'tor estam, v'inu dea mahi, haviyomer tumas kodesh, v'menu inu letumas kodesh, t'nafkele midu Rebbe, t'neu inu letumas mikdash. Okay, it was basically a redo of Rava's first suggestion, right, to say that the extra one is to teach that whenever I have Tumas Stam, it's talking about Tumas Kodesh, but I don't need it for Kodesh by Olav Yored, so it's talking about Tumas Mikdash. And this time, though, we're saying that we're not doing it based on the fact that it says Karis there, but the fact that it says Tumah there. But v'hai nami mi boy le ayid de boy le michtav karis ichdavabau kasav nami tumah de lo sagi lo bilavachi. To which the Gemara says, no, you can't do that. You can't just change the word and make the same thing and just switch the word and say, well, instead of saying, why does it say karis 3 times, why does it say tumah 3 times? Well, I'll tell you why it says tumah 3 times. Because tumah is what you chayv karis for. You couldn't not say tumah if you're saying you chayv karis. If it says you chayv karis, of course it's also going to say you chayv tumah. Don't start making drushes from the fact that it says tumah 3 times. Of course it says tumah 3 times. That's what you chayv karis for. No, so when, don't go there. Ella on my Rave rather says Rave Asya tum also. So here, listen up. Here we go. This is how we know that in addition to Tamei Shachas HaKodesh, also Tamei Shenichnas LaMikdash would be Chayiv a Korban Olav Yored, because Ksiv Hachat says by Korban Olav Yored L'chol Tum Asay, U'Ksiv Hasam, and it says by Tamei Shenichna, but Tamei Shenichnas LaMikdash, what does the pasuk say? Kla Nogeya b'Meis b'Nefesh Adam Shayomas V'Lo Yischata as Mishkan Hashem Timei. Right, it says Mishkan Hashem Timei Nimlus LaNefesh MiYisrael Kimenida Lozar Kalav Tamei Yeh Od Tum Aso Bo. So it says, right, so it says Tamei Yeh Od Tum Aso Bo. So it says by Korban Olav Yoreh, it says L'chol Tum Aso. And it says by Tamei Shenichnas LaMikdash Tamei Yeh Od Tum Aso Bo. Ma Lahalan Tumas Mikdash Afkan Tumas Mikdash. There you have it. So 2 separate Gezerah Shavas. How do we know Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav, that the Tumah by Korban Olav Yored is Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav? Well, because Tamei Shachal HaKodesh is learned from Behemat Tmeah, like Rebbe, and Tamei Shenichnas HaMikdash is learned out from Tumaso, that we learned just now. That's Tamei Shenichnas HaMikdash, and there you have it. We only include by the Korban Olav Yored these Tumas that we have drushes for. Tamei Shachas HaKodesh, Tamei Shenichnas HaMikdash, and that is it. Ve'ela ba lamali. Well, then what do I need ba for to exclude? Kilu, I need ba to exclude something. If I would think to include both Tamei Shenichnas LaMikdash and Tamei Shachal Truma, ba needs to exclude, right? So ba is coming to exclude one of them. Here, I have no reason to think that I should include Tamei Shachal Truma, because we're only including things that have specific limudim for. And there's no limud for Tamei Shenichnas, for Tamei Shachal Truma. So ba lamali. So what's ba coming to teach them? What's it excluding? Well, lerabos nivlas oftar. It's coming to include that if somebody became tamei by swallowing, right, nivlas oftar, the carcass of a pure bird is not mitame b'maga. It's mitame b'beis habliya. When you swallow it, so then you become tamei. So if somebody became tamei by swallowing nivlas of tame of tahor, so then he would also be included in this prohibition. Would have to bring a korban olav yored. Ha'amad ba mi'utahu, but I thought we said ba is a mute, not a ribui. Well, mishum de mi'utahu aiser. Well, davka, because ba is a mute, that's why it's coming to include. Tell me more. Well, ksiv oki yiga the bar negia in, the la bar negia la. Well, because the pasuk already said by korban olav yored, oki yiga, somebody becoming tamei by touching. Well, that already excludes nivlas of tahor, because nivlas of tahor is not mitame b'negia. You don't become tamei by touching it; you become tamei by swallowing it. If somebody shoved it down your throat, you'd become tamei. Uchsiv ba, and it also says ba to once again exclude nivlas of tahor. Why is it excluding, right? Ein riboy, ein miut achamiut ela l'rabos. Right? By excluding nivlas of tahor twice, it's taka coming to include nivlas of tahor. Right? So uchsib ba miuta have a miut achamiut, and miut achamiut ela l'rabos, and miut achamiut is coming to include, and therefore it includes somebody who's tamei from a nivlas of tahor by swallowing it. However, we are going to stop here. It's kind of high up on Zayin Amud Beis. That means that I guess tomorrow is probably going to be a longer daf. The thing is, there's just, as I mentioned earlier, there's basically a long brisa now that we're going to break down bit by bit in tomorrow's daf. And I just have a feeling if we do it now, we're going to end up doing it again tomorrow. So let's just do it tomorrow, because I feel like we're just going to end up doing it tomorrow anyways. So, that was Daf Zayin in Masechta Shevuos. We learned about how we know that the Tumah by Korban Olav Yored is talking about Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshav Pisal.